Everybody, Dan Holstein here with some of my good friends. We've got Tony Smits from Smits Grove LLP, Laurie Ogilvie from Remax, and Pat Palmer from Zoom Mortgage. And today what we're talking about is what do we need to know as first-time home buyers? It's a bit of an exciting journey. It could be a little bit scary too if we've never purchased a home before. So today is all about learning what to do, what not to do, the pitfalls to look out for, and best practices to make sure that your first-time home buying experience is fantastic. So with that, why don't I flip it back over to Pat?
Okay, thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. I think when engaging first-time home buyers, we all see people at different stages. I know that Tony and I were talking, and he had an individual talking to him about some legal advice, but they hadn't solidified their financial situation, which was a little worrisome. I know that when people are meeting with Laurie or engaging with Laurie, one of the first things she asks them is,
have you been pre-qualified?
Right, because Laurie wants to know that people know exactly what they can afford before they go moving forward. So typically I'm early in the process. People are engaging with me to understand what can I or can't I afford. In some cases they'll go to their local financial institution and talk to them, which is fine, to better understand what they can afford. But if they're only going to their local institution, they're really only talking to one lender. Mm-hmm. Whereas when they come to a brokerage, we have, a vast lender network of banks, monoline lenders, etc., where we can actually shop the mortgage. So they're talking to many lenders instead of just one lender. One of the things they want to do first is get a pre-approval. But there's
why is that so important to get the pre-approval?
Okay. Well, it's critically important because when they're talking to Laurie about what they want to buy, they need to understand exactly what they can afford. And there's some language in that. There's what's called a pre-approval and there's called a rate hold. And in some cases, they may go to a lender and perhaps that lender has some information about them, but doesn't get the detailed information about them. Then they'll say something like, you're pre-approved for X. But what they've really done is they haven't underwritten the deal, meaning collected information to make sure it's solid. They've got some general information and they think it's okay. What they've done is what's called a rate hold. And typically that's anywhere from 90 to 120 days. Whereas a pre-approval, which I do, I collect the necessary information that my lenders need. I look at all of it to make sure it's been scrutinized and looks great. And then we give our clients a written pre-approval so they know exactly what they can afford and confidently move forward in the process.
Okay, so the first-time homebuyers got to be really clear in the languaging. The rate hold or pre-qualify is different from the pre-approval, which involves a bit of due diligence, and they're 100% solid that they will be approved for those funds when they find their home that they're after.
Absolutely, because as you know, Dan, this process can be stressful for somebody who's never done it before, and knowing that you're approved in advance is really important.
Great. Okay, so we've got to make sure we have our approval 100% so we don't get disappointed when we find the house we want. Now we're back to Laurie. Yeah. And what happens after your client has got their pre-approvals looked after, now they're engaging with you? What does that look like for next steps?
So what that looks like is we meet for coffee or wherever's comfortable, either a coffee shop or my office. And what I do with them is I go through the whole process. We actually even sit down and look at what an offer is going to look like. Because I know when offer day comes, they aren't going to even be listening to me.
It's been emotional on offer day, right?
Oh, totally emotional. They're not hearing anything. So it's important for them to go through the process first, a dry run per se, and I want to make sure they are pre-approved so that we are shopping in the right market for what they're looking for. I go through a wish list with them, a nice to have, a want to have, need to have, so that I'm putting them in the right place. I also like to know and understand about their lifestyle. They're not just buying a home, they're buying a lifestyle. So what does that look like to them? Once I have all that information and go through the offer process with them at a desk and just get that, we're ready to hit the road and start looking at homes. And after we start looking at a few, I really get a great sense for what it is they're looking for. And then we sort of filter it down into a smaller funnel. And eventually we find the right property.
And you're starting that off based on all the criteria they've given you, so you're not taking them around to wasting time.
No,
there's yours.
No, they can go off on their own sometimes to open houses. That's fine. But when they find that they're at open houses where they're just channeling in along the street, they walk into properties that are completely unaffordable for them, quite typically. So it's a big waste of time. So generally, we set appointments and go out and look at properties together.
Okay, great. So we've got financing arranged. Mm-hmm. We've got a realtor that's going to make sure you take them to places that are exactly the criteria they're looking for. But nothing happens until Tony does his bit. So at what point do we need to engage engage our lawyer to make
Yeah.
sure that we're ready to go?
Great question, Dan. So usually it really depends on what type of home the home buyer is looking for. So it can be a newly constructed home, in which case we would review the agreement of purchase and sale, make sure there's no surprising costs that the builders might be charging on closing, the rules and restrictions governing the property. If it's a condominium, for example, there might be restrictions and rules governing the condominium, as well as common expenses that the purchasers need to be aware of. We also make sure that there's proper conditions in place if it's just a resale property to make sure the purchasers are protected.
So it's an interesting point you make about condos. With the price of real estate these days, I imagine a lot of new first-time home buyers, they may have some university or post-secondary debt. They may not be able to afford a single-family home per se, depending on their financial status. So there may be more condos being bought. You mentioned about hidden conditions and things like that. So is that something that the first-time home buyer can get tripped up on if they get excited and they get involved in a purchase process and they haven't got to that level of due diligence? Like, what do they need to look out for? How do you help them with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, for condominiums, it's a good idea to review the status certificate. That'll tell you about the rules of the condominium as well as the budget of the condominium. So whether there's a lot of expenses and capital expenses coming up in the next few years that they'll be responsible for paying through the common expenses.
It's probably something that a lot of new condo buyers aren't 100% clear on, is that they're going to be paying to maintain the building.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So the budgets are available. I didn't know that. That's good learning for me. So,
Yeah.
so cool. So you can help them get the budgets and understand what their additional financial commitments are going to be.
Exactly. So it's always a good idea to include those types of conditions if you're purchasing a condominium unit, to have it reviewed by a lawyer.
Okay. And with that, does that mean that once they find that out, and if they find there's additional expenses that they know they're going to incur, would they want to come back to you, Pat, and have a conversation about adding a little bit of additional mortgage on there for some additional cash buffer, or
Potentially they might. Each circumstance is different, so the needs of the client is a little bit different. But yeah, in some cases they might do that. Yeah.
Okay, great. So at what point, Tony, do we need to be engaging with the lawyer? 'Cause from what I've heard people speaking about, it's like, oh shoot, I forgot, I've got to get a lawyer to get this thing going as well. It sounds like that's bad planning. So at what stage does someone need to make sure that they get their lawyer involved?
We usually recommend the lawyer be involved pretty early in the process as well, just in case there are certain conditions that need to be reviewed, or review the status certificate, or if it's a newly constructed home, there are certain rules and restrictions that govern the properties as well.
Gotcha. So they need to pull their team
Yes,
together
and if they're talking to one of the three of us, obviously one of the questions we ask is, in my case, do they have a great realtor? Do they have a great lawyer? Because there's real benefits in a team that has worked together before in making that process go smoothly.
So can you give me an example of how, something that would come up that you would smooth it out because you guys work together as a team?
Well, there could potentially, a status certificate, for example, acquiring information in regards to, the condo budgeting, how it is, making sure that we get that. Typically, that's something that is going to be requested by the realtor. I'm going to need a copy of it for the lender. Tony's going to have to view it from his standpoint in regards to the close of the transaction. And if we work together before, we don't have to guess what's about to happen. We know what each other is going to do.
Gotcha. So
And just want to also iterate that that we also make sure that we have the client's permission that we are
Right.
Collaborating and speaking, so that
Yeah.
they know that we're talking about anything to do with the purchase that they're making, and working on their best behalf
Great. So
together.
they pre-approve that you guys can share whatever
Yeah.
confidential information
Right.
to help get the
Yeah.
deal complete
We
successfully.
can't share that without their permission.
Right. Okay. So I could imagine that prevents them from having to be the bottleneck or the go-between when there's something that needs to be expedited quickly.
Mhm.
You guys can just have the conversation, present solution, as opposed to
Right.
talking to the purchaser and then having to get back and forth and that
Right.
kind of
Exactly.
speeds things
Totally.
up.
Speeds things up.
Okay. So what are some of the common pitfalls that you guys see with? And maybe I'll start with Tony on this. We'll kind of go through.
Sure.
What are some of the common pitfalls that you see with first-time home buyers? Mistakes that they make or things that they want to watch out for?
Yeah, sure. So, for example, oftentimes they may not have financing in place, like Pat already mentioned earlier in the video. Then they're scrambling on the day before closing or a few days before closing to try and arrange proper financing for their first-time home purchase, which can be stressful for everyone involved, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
There may not be other proper conditions in place, like an inspection condition, so there could be surprises after they close the transaction when they move in. They could have a flooded basement or something like that, for example. Those types of things we can see from time to time if they don't have proper protections in place from working with a great team.
Great. So you've got like a checklist of things that you're going to make sure that you take them through, that they know, so that when they're moving forward, they've got all those bases covered.
Yeah, exactly.
Not going to step into any holes. Okay, cool. So what are some of the challenges that you see with first-time buyers? And
So some of the challenges that I see are not preparing them or protecting them well enough with certain conditions. So even though they've had a pre-approval with a mortgage agent, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have approval for the purchase of that particular property. So really
that come down
important.
to how the bank ends up valuing the property based on
Right,
neighborhood
so
or things
I
like
would
that?
always put in a condition that they're gonna have a condition on financing, so that when I send it to Pat, he can run it through the numbers on that. He wants the copy of the listing. He wants to run it through the numbers to make sure that that property is the value it is, and they're not going to be over extending themselves because it doesn't appraise out what they're paying for it. So really important for resale as well.
Yeah.
So making sure they're protected with the financing, making sure they're protected with home inspection, making sure that they're not buying a home that's stigmatized. There could be history on that particular property that they're not aware of. So that is all the due diligence that I do in order to protect them in the process. And if they're not protected, they could run into a lot of problems.
Gotcha. Okay. So I'm thinking back to when we bought our first home a long time ago. It was a bit of an exciting, a little bit emotional day, especially when we're doing, before not just taking possession, but the offer process about will it be accepted, how high can we go? And I'm thinking in terms of with the market being very interesting as we're the last couple of years with competition, do you find that you've got to really coach your clients around not giving into the emotion, not going too high, setting limits and to rein them in? Or
Absolutely. And they can get emotionally caught up on just pretty and want to overpay for it because it speaks pretty. And I have to keep them back down and go back through what they told me right in the very beginning. These are the things they were looking for. And make sure that when they're making that decision that they remember, well, we really wanted a big kitchen, but this house that's pretty has a really tiny kitchen. So that, once they're in there 6-7 months or a year later, they're not thinking, oh my gosh, what did we go and get this house for? We didn't want, whatever. So
and that comes to the lifestyle questions you're asking earlier.
exactly.
How do you
So
live?
I really make sure when they are going through that process that I revisit what they've told me is important before they actually sign on anything. Because fast forward, when you're out of that emotional state, I want them to be happy.
And I think what Laurie is also touching on, and I know Tony has as well, it's about setting expectations with the client. It's about helping them to understand the process, what's going to happen in the process, where where emotion can potentially be involved in the process, and sort of ground them so that they can feel comfortable about something that at times can be a little bit stressful.
Very good.
Yeah.
So they have an expectation of what's going to happen. They can kind of anticipate some of the challenges along the way. You're going to help hold their hand through it.
It's not, oh my God, the sky is falling. We already talked about this. We know what we're going to do. This is our approach. Okay.
Talk them off the ledge a little bit, or make sure they never get near the ledge, right?
Right.
Make sure everything's smooth.
Not getting near the ledge is better.
Yeah.
Awesome. So what are some of the best practices that you guys like to see with someone that's buying a home for the first time? What are some of those tick boxes they've got to hit in terms of always do this? Whoever would like to answer that one.
I don't know.
Well, to me, obviously, the best practice is to have them completely understand what's going to happen and what their role is, and when they have to be involved in the process, when they have to give us feedback, so that they're prepared to do that. Whether it's Tony collecting some information or documents in regards to closing, making sure they're aware of that up front so that it's not a last minute, oh my God, I need that information kind of thing. So preparing them for what's going to happen and then making sure they know what their role is.
Gotcha. And do you find, and I guess this question is more for Laurie, do you find you ever have to alter people's expectations in terms of they want to have maybe something like their parents have now,
Many
but it's their
times.
first time, and so how do you explain or how do you help someone adjust to what their financial situation is and get something that they love but within their budget?
You just have to manage it right from the beginning. And that's even before we go and start looking at homes. And that's what part of the process of me meeting them is where we sit down and we look at homes. So, whatever they are going to be able to afford. And this is sort of what this picture looks like. So they might be able to afford that home like mom and dad's house, but they might only be able to afford it over here, not where they were actually thinking.
Like in a different
area,
city or something.
right? And that will pull me out of many areas and move me into other areas with them because prices are different all over.
Right.
So we might be able to get that, but then we have to manage the lifestyle. Can you actually take the GO train to work, or can you actually, is that manageable with dropping your kids off? So that's where the lifestyle really comes into that. So
Make sure that can be house rich, cash poor, not be able to do some things that they want to do.
Right, because if it's important for them to, do certain activities with the kids and they can't afford them because they want this house, maybe it's not right now. Maybe that's what we build towards. But that's why I also want to make sure I put them in a home that is going to be valuable resale-wise. And they're not buying something that is an anomaly that is going to be very difficult to sell down the road, so that they have a good resale home so they can move up to that next step eventually.
Right,
and that's planning.
Yeah, preparing for the future.
Yep.
Very good. So Tony, question for you. And I'll pose this for all of you guys as well, but I'll start with you, Tony. So when someone is deciding that, I need a lawyer, and what are the attributes that they need to look for in terms of how do they know they've got the right lawyer fit for them?
Yeah, they certainly want to, do a search, either ask their friends and family members or go online and make sure you find someone that's, not a specialist in real estate law, but certainly has experience, is an experienced real estate lawyer that knows, the ins and outs of real estate law and any issues that they might encounter and that they're comfortable with. So certainly that is important. That's what I would suggest that they look for. Yeah.
And I know that you also provide additional services in terms of timing, weekends, evening appointments, and things like that. So is that part of that a service that you have? Is that helpful in terms of having everything flow well with timing and key pickup and document signing and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. We find that we work with a lot of commuter and young families and stuff like that. Both parents may be working throughout the day and stuff like that. So it's just easier for them to sometimes sign in the evenings. We can meet with them during the evenings and or on the weekends and sign with them to finish up the deal because it's more convenient for them. So we find that helps people a lot.
Yeah, cool, great. So Laurie, I pass the question to you. So when someone's looking to find a great realtor for themselves, what are some of the attributes that you recommend they look for?
Well, they want somebody that isn't going to be completely pushy and transaction-based. They want somebody that's going to be looking out for their best interests. One thing I would caution people when they are making their purchase, a lot of people have a belief that they should go to the listing agent because they're selling that particular house, and they think that they can work a deal or something on commission with that listing agent. But they don't realize,
well,
yeah,
right?
well, it's a conflict for sure, but I mean, that agent is actually working for the seller.
Right.
And if they're not coming in with their own buyer representative, which I would be in that situation, there's nobody protecting them. My interest is your best interest.
Right, just like the listing agent, their interest is the seller, your interest is in the buyer.
How can they represent both parties equally?
Yeah, I'm sure there's rules in place for that.
And the first relationship was with the listing people.
Right.
So it's very difficult because the listing people will be very upset with them if they feel that they're siding with the other side. So it's best to have a buyer representative that will go in and make sure they dig in and find out all of the information that we need to know in order to make sure that's a solid purchase, and that is what you should be paying for that particular property, and anything you need in that offer that will build you protection in purchasing that property.
Right. So an agent that specializes in being a buyer's agent.
Not necessarily specializes, but somebody that is going to represent them in that transaction as their representative. I mean, most agents will do buying and selling. So whatever position we're in, which is buying for first time, you're going to be a buyer representative in that situation. So
Makes sense.
make sure that they're versed in the area and that they're looking after you, not the seller.
I must admit, that was the learning that I had when we bought our first house. I didn't know there was such a thing as a buyer's agent. I thought that we just go and engage with the listing agent.
Right.
But we learned that's not the case.
No.
We had good representation. So.
Right.
Great. So, Pat, for you, what are some of the attributes that when someone's looking for their financial partner in a purchase transaction, what do they need to be looking for?
Well, first of all, I think when people are first-time home buyers, they want to be confident that they are getting the best advice they can financially. And I think by talking to a brokerage, what they're doing is they're essentially having access to a larger vendor network. So I think that that's a place to start. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be contacting their local financial institution as well, but what we do as part of our brokerage is we shop their mortgage for them. We help identify where the best rates, terms, and conditions are for our clients. So
and that's a key thing. It's not just rate, is it? Because there's certain constraints that individuals might have, where the rate isn't going to be the biggest consideration, but the flexibility or portability of the mortgage is going to be important too, right?
Absolutely, and a lot of people don't know that because lenders don't really talk much about that. They talk about rate, although rate's important to the payment of the transaction. Having portability, having prepayment privileges to pay your mortgage down quicker is really important, and having that flexibility in the mortgage so that you've got a mortgage that is complete, not just one-sided. I also think that it's important to work with somebody who is sensitive to how you feel about the process and also has a team that they can refer you to so that you don't have to go hunting for a realtor or a lawyer. You've got a team that has worked together before, and it makes for a smoother experience.
Yeah, fantastic, wonderful. So we've covered on the importance of getting the right lending partner, the importance in how to get the best realtor for you, and also the importance of getting a fantastic lawyer, and also the timing, which I think is really important as well. Do you guys have anything else to add in before we wrap up?
There are some misnomers about the costs associated with the experience. People are always very sensitive and worried about what are things going to cost. And in my case with lending, especially with first-time home buyers, in the majority of cases, there's zero cost associated with my services. And the reason for that is the lender pays us a fee. So the consumer, there's no cost to our services. We walk them through the whole thing. There are some cases with other types of lending where there are some fees, but in the majority of cases with first-time home buyers, it's absolutely free.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, good to know. How about for yourself, Laurie?
In my case, it's also free. What we do is we sign a buyer representation agreement, and what that means is we're making a commitment to each other. We're going to be spending maybe a month, maybe a year, I don't know, whatever that looks like to these individuals. But we're going to be spending a lot of time and looking at homes and a lot of time conversing about different properties. So it's a commitment that we're working together as a team. They aren't going off and getting this agent to do this and do that. They're working together with me, committed, and I don't get paid until the deal is actually closed with their purchase. So when they're moving in and everything is all cleared through Tony and Pat, and that's all been taken care of, I then get paid by the seller brokerage. So there is no cost to the buyer for using my services, just a commitment.
Fantastic. Great. And what about for yourself, Tony?
That's a great question, and usually lawyer closing costs can vary significantly depending on the character and nature of the property and the cost of the property. So in 2018, generally that lawyer closing costs can range from about $1,800 to about $3,000.
Great. So as we're wrapping up, do you guys have any one-word nuggets to kind of share for everybody?
Yeah, I think great communication is really, really important.
Communication.
Yeah.
Great. Laurie?
Be informed before you make the decision.
Great. And Tony?
I just think a predictive experience, so people know what to expect and people know what roles each person is carrying out. It makes the whole transaction a lot smoother.
Great. Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, guys. It's been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot too.
Well,
So I appreciate it.
Dan, and on behalf of the panel, we wanted to thank you, Dan Holstein from Action Coach Business Coach, for moderating today's session. We truly appreciate that. And for those viewers out there, if you want to reach out and contact any of us on the panel, you can just look to the notes below, and we have our contact information there. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Great. Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
Dan.
Thank you.